Hey class, so today we're going to talk about the technical aspects of a vector along with typography. For the first portion of our lecture, this will all be technical information. The second part of our lecture will be the conceptual support to that. So let's get going. What is a vector? So a vector is based on software that uses mathematical equations to describe and define points, lines, curves, and shapes. For this class, that software is going to be Adobe Illustrator. Photoshop, not so much. That's going to be more raster based. Illustrator, thumbs up to vector. That is what we're going to be using. So as you can see here, we have this mathematical line. First, you're going to have your point. That is going to be made with your pen tool. So we'll go over this in our tutorials, but your pen tool will mark your first point. You'll most likely make your second point, at which point you will then use another tool to create the line and the curve and the handle to control those 2 points to achieve the shape you are looking to achieve. So basically, a vector is a line that has a curve and a handle, most simply stated. The two main advantages of vector graphics are resolution, right, is independent. It's fully scalable without quality loss, and they are relatively small file sizes. So here on the left, you see this raster graphic at 500%, whereas you see the vector graphic at 500%. If you were going to print one of these, I can only assume that most of you would choose the vector graphic on the right-hand side. So really, it's pretty simple. Vector is a mathematical equation that scales infinitely without the loss of quality. And that is because, again, the information is mathematically based versus being based on bitmap information. So that's really not a whole lot going on to vectors. It's pretty simple and straightforward. Once you can understand the difference between raster and vector, and that it is a mathematical equation, you pretty much have it. So that being said, we are now going to move on to the elements of typography. The reason we're going to do this is because for your final poster, you are going to need to introduce typography into your poster. If you're a graphic designer, you already know the importance of typography to support your message. And so let's talk about that. This is all going to be pretty technical, and we'll go through this fairly quickly. So typeface or font, right? A lot of times we use these terms interchangeably. However, they're not quite the same. A typeface is the collective name of a family of related fonts, such as Times New Roman. Fonts, however, refer to the weights, widths, and styles that constitute a typeface, such as Times New Roman regular, Times New Roman italic, Times New Roman bold. Not all typefaces consist of multiple fonts, however. So down there we have Merriweather typefaces, for example. So here's some of the naming conventions of fonts. We have weights, and the different weights here: hairline, thin, ultralight, extra light, book, regular, Roman, medium, semi-bold, extra bold, ultra black. We have widths. That's going to be compressed, condensed, semi-condensed, narrow, normal, extended, extra, extended, expanded. And then we also have different styles, which are going to be Roman, italic, cursive, oblique, small caps, so on and so forth. We have optical sizes, which are going to, you'll see these in like Google Slides a lot, or when you are writing HTML, so caption, text, subhead, display, deck, poster. You have different grades, so grade 1, grade 2, 3, and 4, subtly different weight to accommodate for different printing conditions. And then effects, which most of you are probably somewhat familiar with, which are inline, outline, shadow, fill, and bevel. So again, these are going to give your typeface a different feel with weights, with effects. It's going to make it pop or kind of dissolve into the background. It kind of depends on the effect you are looking for with your poster. So there are, sorry about that. There are 5 basic classifications of typefaces: serif, sans serif, script, monospaced, and display. So here we have one of the oldest typefaces, at least in the Western tradition, and that is going to be black letter, as we see here by this lovely Motorhead font. Black letter scripts are very formal, based on handwritten calligraphy, strong contrast on strokes, right? So there's a big contrast here on this K, right? From top to here, that goes from a very thin stroke to a very thick stroke. There are some examples down there, which you can feel free to look into if this is a typeface you want to explore for your poster. We have serif, right? So serif is a small stroke or line regularly attached to the end of a larger stroke in a letter or symbol with a particular font of family or fonts. A typeface or family font, or font family, sorry, making use of serifs is called a serif or serifed typeface, and a typeface that does not include them is one that we're going to call a sans serif. So here you will see the serif is highlighted in red, and that is going to be a serifed font. If you removed those, you would have a sans serif font. So serif typefaces include a slight projection finishing off the strokes of its letter forms called serifs. They generally include diagonal stress, the thin parts on the diagonal rather than the horizontal or vertical axis, right? See this right here. Bracketed serifs where there's a curve attaching a stem and a head, right on the bottom of that L. You're also going to see minimal contrast. See, the contrast here isn't too big. And then you're going to have wedge-shaped serifs right there, as we see. And finally, angled head serifs, as we see there. Transitional serifs generally include vertical strokes, vertical stress, more pronounced contrast than in old style designs, oblique and bracketed serifs. We have modern serifs that include little to no bracketing on the serif's vertical axis on curved strokes, dramatic contrast between thick and thin strokes, as we see here, and ball-shaped stroke terminals right here, as we see on this R. So some examples, and a really popular one would be Dido or Dido. Not really 100% sure how to say that. We also have slab serifs, which are going to be the final evolution of the serif style. And this comes with the advent of mechanization, the steam press. So here, as you can see, heavy serifs with little or no bracketing, virtually no contrast in weight. Examples include American Typewriter and Rockwell, which is a very common and popular serif. Sans serifs in typography and lettering simply mean that they do not have the serif at the end of the stroke. They tend to have less stroke and variation, and they're often used to convey simplicity and modernity and minimalism. So you'll see these a lot on like a lot of apothecary products right now. And there's like a whole even apothecary typeface selection. So here we see grotesque sans serifs often include a spurred uppercase, minimal contrast on strokes. As we see, this is pretty much the same all throughout. We also see the curves are a bit more square, so that S is almost like a square right there, and a double story lowercase g. So neo-grotesque sans serifs are more legible, plainer, and have no contrast between strokes. Oh, sorry, we went ahead a bit. Let's see, there we go. So, okay, sorry about the dog there. We have humanistic sans serifs. They're based on proportions of Roman style capitals. They were created to be more legible. They have more contrast than other sans serifs and have a calligraphy. Try to say that 10 times. They have an influence of calligraphy. How does that sound? And here are some examples down here. So, for example, we see Wes Anderson makes use of these typefaces a lot. We also have script. Script typefaces are based on the varied and often fluid strokes created by handwriting. They're generally used for display and trade printing rather than the extended body of text. So this might be like the name of your company, but you wouldn't want to write the bio in this script typeface. We also have formal scripts that are characterized by flowing loops and flourishes, letter forms that are generally connected. casual scripts, calligraphic scripts. So they emulate hand-lettered calligraphy and they generally have a high contrast. And then we have monospaced, right? So monospaced is also called fixed pitch, fixed width, or non-proportional font. So this has to do more with the width. It's a font whose letters and characters each occupy the same amount of horizontal space. The contrast with variable width fonts where letters and spacings have different widths. So you can see the example down here is pretty self-explanatory. Again, you can see that look at the spacing is pretty much equal throughout. So you might even see people do this by just hitting the space bar when they are writing out their type. We have display. So a display typeface is a typeface that is intended for use at larger sizes for headings rather than for extended passages of body text. Again, you wouldn't want to write the bio of your company in stencil or braggadocio. So again, those are, you'll notice this is kind of that American Horror Story Willow typeface, is that American Horror Story kind of typeface. So again, really good for headings, not great for the general body of text. They vary widely in their appearance and include both practical and novelty fonts suitable for headlines and titles. And that being said, that concludes the portion on what a vector is and typefaces. Please get up, take a break, eat a sandwich, get some water, and when you come back, we will go over the conceptual aspects of vector graphics and kind of the origin of some of these graphic design principles. So I will see you all shortly. I want to give you a little bit of context for some of these graphic design principles. And we are going to, well, there are some many overlapping art movements that contribute to where we kind of are in terms of graphic design today. A really good starting point is Russian constructivism, because they just utilize so many of those principles that we currently see today. So constructivism was an artistic and architectural philosophy, right, that originated in Russia beginning in 1915 by Vladimir Tatlin and Alexander Rodchenko, probably two of the most famous constructivist artists. It was noted as being abstract, austere, constructivist art aimed at reflecting modern industrial society and urban space. The movement rejected decorative stylization in favor of industrial assemblage and materials. Constructivists were in favor of art for propaganda and social purposes and were associated with Soviet socialism, the Bolsheviks, and the Russian avant-garde. So real quick, before we go too deep into that, we're going to look at some of the other influences that are also happening during this time. Dada, which we have discussed earlier. We have Cubism. This is Picasso's Guernica. Very kind of graphic designy. It's almost like pixelated if you look at it before, pixelation was a thing. We have Futurism, which was very popular in Italy and really had to do with machines and like how fast you could go, and really Futurism had to do with machines. All of these have manifestos. If any of them strike any interest in your heart and mind, go read them. Some of them are pretty interesting. We have Suprematism, which is very closely related to abstractionism. And okay, so before we go on, let's talk a little bit, again, let's give it some historical context like we did with Dada. So during this time, you have different classes of people in the Soviet Union. You have the social class of wage earners, and those members of society only possess significant economic value in their labor power, i.e., their capacity to work. A member of this class is referred to as being part of the proletariat. Now, a big part of constructivism was that it was intended to communicate to the masses, many who couldn't read. So this was art that was made for the people so that they were able to sort of glean what they needed to get the information, even if they were perhaps illiterate. So during this time, we have the Bolsheviks, who were a radical far left and revolutionary Marxist faction founded by Vladimir Lenin and Alexander Bogdanov. I apologize for any Eastern Europeans if I'm butchering these names. That split from Menshevik fashion, right? So that was who they split off from. Um, they were part of the Democratic Labor Party, a revolutionary socialist political party formed in 1898 at its second party congress in 1903. After forming their own party in 1912, the Bolsheviks took power during the October Revolution in the Russian Republic in November 1917, overthrowing the provisional government of Alexander Kerensky, and became the only ruling party in subsequent Soviet Russia and its successor state, the Soviet Union. They considered themselves the leaders of the revolutionary proletariat of Russia. Their beliefs and practices were often referred to as Bolshevism. So these were people who wanted to elevate the working class. They wanted to make sure that they got their dues and they got paid sufficiently, as you know, it was their work that was reaping all of these rewards. So, okay, so we're going to just move on to Alexei Gan. He was a Russian architect and semi-Bolshevik Marxist. He's a little more middle of the road. He was an avant-garde artist, art theorist, and graphic designer. He was a key figure in the development of an anarchist newspaper and introduced into its art section. He was one of 7 artists, including Rodchenko and his wife Varvara Stepanova. Don't know if I'm saying that right. Who it might be Stepnova, who announced themselves as the first working group of constructionists. The group rejected fine art in favor of graphic design, photography, posters, and political propaganda. He collaborated with Alexander Rodchenko and Stepanova on the Constructivist Manifesto in 1922, and he also published his own pamphlet, Constructivism, that same year. So here we have very minimal color palette, red, white, black, and usually blue. They're using a combination of photo montage, right? So this would be probably a photograph that was turned into a print for production. And it was also layered with typography. So back in the day, whereas we can do all of this digitally now, this was all done by hand. Everything from the taking of the photographs, transferring it to some sort of plate for printing, and then all of the typography sort of plates, I guess you could call them as well, that would be run through the printing press. So to actually make this took a lot more time. Again, I just want you to keep in mind, this is all analog, everything we're looking at. Here we have the cover of Constructivism, the manifesto that was written in 1922. Again, really clean typeface, really clean color palette, red, black, and white. We also have, you can see the interior of this. This is a page from Constructivism designed by Gan. You see that not only does it include your sort of just run-of-the-mill horizontal writing, but you also start to see some sort of like vertical diagonal stuff going on, which you can also do in Illustrator with the type on path tool. So you would make a pen line and then type on path tool. This is a little bit more clear version of that. Again, if you want to read any of these manifestos, they're quite poetic, interesting, lots of things going on in them. I encourage you to take a look. Again, very clean color palette. We have this sort of parchment, color white, because that was probably just the color of the paper. We have a navy blue with a, I guess maybe crinoline blue. I'm not really sure. I'm not the most expert color theorist, but you can see they are using an analogous blue color palette here. Again, you see some architectural influences as well. So this is, again, this is art for utilitarian purposes. This isn't art for art's sake for rich people. This is art for the people. It's meant to serve the people and be practical at the same time. So we also have L. Lissitzky. He was of Lithuanian Jewish descent. He studied architecture in Germany and was an important figure in the Russian avant-garde. He helped develop suprematism actually with his mentor Kazimir Malevich and designing numerous exhibition displays and propaganda works for the Soviet Union. His work greatly influenced the Bauhaus and constructivist movement. So we'll look, I think there's a couple Bauhaus slides in here perhaps. Bauhaus was going on in Germany at that time. And he experimented with his production techniques and stylistic devices that would go on to dominate 20th century graphic design and really 21st century as well. He died quite young from tuberculosis. So Elazinski is a major player in graphic design and a huge influence of the graphic design of today, really. So again, all of these are manually done on a printing press. As you can see, it's not your just standard run-of-the-mill typeface that goes horizontal or even just vertical. Rather, he's making a lot of diagonal lines here as well. A lot of negative space. So again, that's what makes this type of design so clean. While there's a lot going on, there's a lot of negative space in between these letters. So keep that in mind as you're approaching your poster. Sometimes less is more, especially, right, keep in mind you're making this for an illiterate class of people. So you want them to be able to like read it, even if they can't read it, right? Interior of the book. See, you have these really nice sort of tabs over here. Always love that. That's just great book design. Here we have some more work. This one's a little more figurative, a bit more movement going on. And again, you see, like, look at this typeface. There's a lot of movement happening here. This is probably Liszewski's most famous piece. It's called The Red Wedge. This is done in 1919. Again, you see a lot of suprematism influences here, and as you should, he helped develop the movement. And next we're going to talk about Vladimir Tatlin. He was a Russian-Ukrainian Soviet painter, architect, and stage designer. He achieved fame as the architect who designed the monument to the Third International, more commonly known as Tatlin's Tower. Get familiar with it. You will learn about it again in art history, most likely. He began this with Kazimir Malevich. He was one of the most important figures in the Soviet avant-garde in the 1920s, and he later became an important artist in the constructivist movement as well. So Tatlin was actually anti-Stalin and criticized, he was also criticized for his anti-communist views, which subsequently got him fired from his job, but he did continue to work. So here we have Vladimir Tatlin. Tatlin's Tower. This is a mock-up at the Third International, so this would be the original one. Since then, we have seen them reproduced. This is what it would look like in a more contemporary museum context. Here we see the typographic and print version of that. Again, all analog, all done by hand, all very simple colors and quite legible. This is a sculpture he did. Again, you can see this is very sort of movement oriented. He's utilizing it in this corner. He's utilizing the corners of the space, which I feel like a lot of, doesn't always happen. A lot of people tend to go just for the walls. So it is a corner counter relief, 1914. And here we are going to also talk about Alexander Rodchenko. He is probably the most easily identifiable graphic artist of this period, and he's widely imitated even still. Rodchenko became a founding member of the Constructivist Working Group in 1921, which defined art making as a form of professional expertise and labor like any other, and not as a spiritual calling, as a lot of artists at this time are thinking it's a spiritual calling. He's seeing, you know what, no, this is art, this is work, and it requires expertise. So he kind of brought it back down to earth. Using the materials and tools of an architect or engineer, he would use a compass, a ruler, and plywood. He produced a series of spatial constructions in 1921, which were hung suspended from the ceiling. And with these structures, he abandoned the premise of traditional sculpture. So he wanted to get rid of the pedestal and the precious materials. Kind of has some similarities to Dada as well, right? We wanted to make it so it wasn't this precious, special thing. Rather, it really was made from everyday materials by everyday people. His photographs and photo montages were, I wouldn't say every day. Most of these artists are quite privileged. Still, they came from middle class to wealthy backgrounds, a lot of them. His photographs and photo montages were published widely in avant-garde periodicals. And in the early 1930s, he embraced photography as a tool for social commentary, critically depicting the disparity between the idealized and lived Soviet experience. The images he made contrasted with socialist realism, which was declared the official style of art by the Soviet Union in 1934. So we'll get to Soviet realism soon, but let's look at some of Rodchenko's work. This is Rodchenko's wife, Varvara Stepanova. I think the A might be silent. This is portrait for a poster. Now, we're going to see this come up again. A lot of you are actually probably going to have seen some variation of this in your life and not even realize where it has come from. Here is the final poster. So again, right, he took that photograph, probably developed it himself, maybe he didn't, and then he had to make some kind of print plate out of it. Maybe, I don't know if it's lithograph or what. I'm not a printer anymore. So again, we have the photograph turned into a printing plate, and then we also have the typographic elements here as well, all done by hand. This is some of his photography. Again, we're seeing a lot of these lines are not just horizontal or vertical, but rather diagonal as well. And we're seeing really the breakdown of just these really basic shapes. Here we have the cover of a book. About That is what it's called in English. I think that might be Varvara Stepanova, but I am not 100% sure. It kind of looks like her. Again, really simple, let me go back. Really simple color palette. We have a really nice use of both white negative space and black negative space. And then the way that he really uses the typeface, right, to work with the outline of her head and give it even a little bit more negative space in there, playing into that typography. It's really beautiful. Again, it's just like the simple details that make these posters really stand out, and something you might want to keep in mind as you approach your own poster project. This is another photograph he took, very angular. This one has something to do with state security, I believe. And if you look very closely, again, this one's a little bit less negative space. The typeface is a little bit more standardized. But when you see this logo up here and you see this right here, you might notice that it has some similarities to a little brand that you guys are aware of, Supreme or Shepherd Ferry, who are contemporary artists that we're going to look here in a minute, are very influenced by this work. So it still has a lot of really compelling graphic design elements that we use today. And again, we also have the mirroring of these two faces down here. So the way they mirror each other gives it even, and we also have the mirroring of these cameras as well. So the mirroring really gives it a nice element and points up to the big brother element of that eyeball watching us at all times, the omnipresent eyeball. So this is Rodchenko's wife, Varvara Stepanova. She is an amazing artist as well. So with the collapse of the Russian Empire and the advent of the Soviet regime brought about fundamental changes in all areas of culture, and the visual arts were no exception. The revolution, many avant-garde artists argued, called for more direct engagement with the social world. Varvara Stepanova, who stood at the forefront of these changes, had this to say about the new art necessitated by the regime, and I quote, "Constructivism is a movement away from representation and contemplation toward activity and production." So again, what she's saying here is, this isn't a nice, beautiful impressionist painting where you can just kind of, contemplate and lose yourself in. Rather, their work is really made to kind of kick people into gear to want to participate for their community and be active in the production of, perhaps whatever it is during this time, shoes, wool blankets, that sort of thing. Very hands-on, tactile gross domestic product at the time. So again, we have, she really utilized this photography well, right? We have the red star in the center. We have the top, which is a lot lighter. It's a lot more exposed. The bottom is a little more underexposed, but you have this these really nice imaginary lines cutting it into thirds for this poster and really accented by that star. She also did book design. I mean, how incredible is this as like product/book design? Just very cool looking. She also designed uniforms and textiles as well, right? So again, we're seeing these like elements of negative space throughout all of this. And again, very simple color palettes: red, white, black, in this case, gold, black, and the natural paper color. I say white, but it's more of a parchment. Again, really simple color palette here, right? We have analogous blues. We have a dark blue. We have a lighter, almost like crinoline blue. And then we have the movement of the man on roller skates who is taking a photograph. He's kind of crouched into the space too, so it works really well. So we also have Gustav Clusis. And these are some of his posters. Oh, you know what? Let me go back real quick. There's one last thing I want to tell you about Varvara Stepanova. And that is that she trained at an art school in Moscow. She became fascinated with avant-garde poetry. She illustrated with abstract collages. And she also, really importantly, organized the landmark exhibition, 5 times 5 equals 25, with 5 artists offering 5 works. So really, she was just a powerhouse. And again, in a time when women weren't really necessarily welcome or celebrated in the artistic field. So I just wanted to throw that in there as well. She was also a very influential teacher, and she placed principles, like she really wasn't into emotion and spiritual necessity. Rather, she thought those were too subjective. Again, she really stressed that educators should be able to characterize and express artistic concepts in the world, not just being so subjective about, oh, how does this abstract painting make you feel? So Gustav Clusis was a founding member of the Constructivists as well. He really, again, is using a lot of, he has a little bit more color in some of this work, but again, a lot of the same diagonal elements, a lot of the photo montage, and this one on the right, I believe, has to do with the Olympics. So again, they're like really promoting sort of this like national agenda of work production, sort of greatness, as most nations do. This is the cover design for Soviets of the Revolution. This is a book, I believe. Long live Red Army of Workers and Peasants, faithful guard of Soviet borders. So again, this is really meant to celebrate the Soviet people, the people who the wealth is, the wealthy are able to profit from. Love this one. Again, a ton of negative space, very directional, a lot of movement. Everything's kind of pointing down to that bottom left-hand corner. Valentina, I don't know if I'm saying her right, Kulgiana, she also was another graphic artist as well. So again, a lot of these are meant to support the Soviet agenda. So woman shock workers. So here we see 1931, a lot of women are going to work in factories across the world while the men are at war. And here we are celebrating the women of the Soviet who are holding it down in these factories. Again, like some nice negative space with that white. We see a nice perspective here, right? So sort of that 3-point perspective. May is the day of International Proletariat Solidarity. So again, this solidarity between the working class, that's really what this is meant to celebrate. Very, again, minimal color palette, although we do see a little bit more grayscale in that left-hand side. This is broken into thirds, but not in the traditional horizontal way, right? We're seeing it broken into thirds in a more diagonal way, which is a really interesting way to approach that. We will repay the coal debt. So again, everything's kind of, this is very of 1930 as we move away from coal, hopefully, in this era. But again, meant to celebrate these workers. These are working class Soviet men, and this is meant to celebrate them. Again, very few, very little text, I should say. So again, if you're illiterate, you're able to understand, hey, we're being celebrated. We got to band together, so on and so forth. So in the mid-1930s, we see kind of the end of constructivism. Stalin imposes a new style of art, and that art is state-sanctioned social realism. He regards the avant-garde as a form of art of the bourgeois. So the irony here, right, is that while these artists, generally most of them anyway, created this art for the proletariat, for the working class, Stalin decides, you know what, no, actually, this is not for the proletariat, rather it's for the bourgeois, and he kind of spins the rhetoric to make it seem like the avant-garde, the constructivists are part of the bourgeois class, which they may have been really by birth, but they were not championing that. So it's ironic. And again, it just goes to show you the way that rhetoric can be twisted and spun, and how the political pendulum, no matter what era you are living in, always swings in either direction. So this is a version of state-sanctioned socialist realism. You will see this a lot currently still with North Korea. And then while not state-sanctioned, you could definitely draw some parallels to the American artist Norman Rockwell as well. Has a very similar social, like, realist style. So constructivism in the contemporary. This is the fun stuff. Here we see this artist has taken the mid-century version of Batman and made a constructivist poster out of it. Again, there's like that very parchmenty background, which really makes us feel like it's constructivist. It's not that plain, that super white. So we're going to look at some contemporary artists here. Barbara Kruger, one of my all-time favorite artists. She is so cool. She actually was a graphic designer and worked in the ad industry, but she became disillusioned and crossed over in the contemporary art world. And she tends to do these scathing deconstructions and social critiques. She's widely known for her use of Futura Bold Oblique, which is a wonderful typeface. So she clearly has her own political beliefs, but I Shop Therefore I Am is a really popular one. The Donald Trump one was one she did more recently. And, you know, obviously we all have differing political beliefs. So certainly if you wanted to do something contrasting that, you totally could. Another really famous one she did, Your Body is a Battleground. Again, we see the positive, we see the negative, the photographic negative on the other side. It's split right down the middle. And then that text, which I believe is Futura Bold in this one, is cut into thirds. So this one also really kind of looks very constructivist. You transform prowess into pose. And again, that is very similar to that Rodchenko sort of thing where we see those women on those stairs. Talk is cheap. Again, we're seeing a lot of this text. It's not just going horizontal or vertical, but rather it's going diagonal. We're breaking the space up into thirds diagonally as well. So the rule of thirds is really something you can never go wrong with if you're at a loss for where to start. So we also have Neville Brody. He's well known for his exploration of typeface and punk culture. He's influenced by pop art and Dada. He believes in the power of design to influence social opinions through visual communications. He's become a primary connection between the past and the present. He combines the punk ethos with creative experimentation. He has visually communicated new and innovative concepts to contemporary audience. And yeah, let's just take a look at some of Neville's work. So this is a really famous Nike ad from the 90s. Probably you guys may have not even been born at this time, which is, I'm so old. Yes, so this is a Nike ad. When it came out, it was a 2-pager, super famous. And then again, you see we have like positive, negative, that line that separates the typeface that then changes to black on the white negative space. So lots of movement. We see what it's advertising, shoes, just do it, all that good jazz. This is from a album from the Buzzcocks. They're a punk rock. They are a punk rock band from the 70s, 80s. And this is again photo montage. We also have the very ever famous Sex Pistols album that he did the cover for as well, God Save the Queen. Again, photo montage. It's got that sort of serial killer cutout typeface. And we also have Kraftwerk, electronic music, German electronic music. We also have Van Halen here. Again, very, very inspired by the constructivist. And Franz Ferdinand, which I believe came out in the early 2000s. You guys might be a little more familiar with this, but clearly this is just a straight up, almost dupe of the Rodchenko poster where his wife is yelling. So very similar. Again, like find those artistic references. The more you know about art history, the more it's going to inform your design. Even if you're an animator, you're just going to have a much more robust wheelhouse to draw from. Shepard Fairey, the ever famous Shepard Fairey. So Shepard Fairey, he came from a fairly wealthy family. So it's kind of ironic that he's known for his street art and counterculture posters. He went to RISD with it, which is very prestigious and expensive. His posters heavily reference constructivism in their appearance and message. And he really first came on the scene in the 90s with this Andre the Giant sticker here on the left. You guys are probably more familiar with him, however, because of his Obama Hope poster, which has been widely knocked off as well. But we see a little departure here. I guess not too much of a departure, but we see a lot of the same constructivist elements. Again, this is done with a vector software, so we see a little bit more texture in those light blues. We still see that very constructivist sort of looking parchment as the background, red, light blue, dark blue, all that good jazz. Another Shepard Fairey poster. He's kind of even calling it what it is. So we see the solidarity fist. He's telling you straight up, this is propaganda, because everything is basically Andre the Giant in this left corner. And then we see the sticker that made him super famous with the Andre the Giant in the right hand. And again, we're seeing a lot of this space broken up into thirds, but not horizontally or vertically, rather diagonally. So keep that in mind. We have this poster as well, which I just think is quite lovely. Again, really minimal color palette, really nice use of negative space in here. And last but not least, the Obey with the solidarity fist. And then most recently, Black Sabbath, The End, which also concludes the end of our constructivist lecture. I hope you got some good ideas out of this for your posters. Please look in the course overview. I have a bunch of student work in there as well. And actually, I'm going to show that to you real quick, but I will be right back, and that'll take just a second. So get up, stretch, come back, and we'll be done in 2 minutes. Okay, everybody, thanks for hanging in there. So I just wanted to show you some student work and how they approached it. These students actually were in a 15-week course, so some methods may be a little easier for you in the 7.5-week course. This piece right here was all done with the pen tool, so everything you see here was done with the pen tool. We also have this really nice piece, which she decided to use a more social message. This is from one of my Indigenous students. This is hashtag missing murdered Indigenous women helpline. She used the method of vectorizing a photograph that already existed, and then she worked around that, framed it out. We also decided for her that it would be a good idea to have some sort of message to it and approach it as if she had kind of gotten a commission to make this poster. So she did a really good job here. And I believe that was Lene Batella. And this one was made by Francesca Galvin. Here we have a poster by one of my students, Lorenzo Bones, huge Star Wars fan. He actually wanted to combine two Star Wars posters, but again, everything you see here was actually done with, other than the typeface, right, was done with the pen tool. So he went in there and he actually did that all by hand. You're going to get the difference between vectorizing a photo that already exists versus using the pen tools, that you're going to have a lot more control to get some of those details, and that you might not quite get just by vectorizing the photo. Here, we actually have a combination of pen tools, but with also just vectorizing the photos. So again, a really nice thing about this was that he was able to, initially the typeface was just horizontal, and then we decided, you know what, it probably is going to look better if you do type on path tool. So that is how he achieved that. Again, this is all actually done by vectorizing a photograph. So you can get some nice detail in there. This one is a photo montage. Wouldn't recommend, I just think this one is really nice for the way she used the diagonal, horizontal, and vertical typeface. However, these photos are not vectorized, but I just wanted to show you this as an example for a really nice way to utilize the space into thirds with horizontal, vertical, and diagonal. Here we have another pen tool that was based off of constructivist textile artist. This student decided to go with making a Sam Smith poster. So if you wanted to do something musical, perfectly fine, totally good with that. We also have a slightly more contemporary Greta Thunberg here. So the world is watching. This student used pen tool as well, and also pretty much just traced a magazine cover. So make it easy on yourself, but really beautiful work with the pen tool. Really simple shapes to create the depth. It doesn't have to be so insane and detailed. You can get really nice depth and shape with, or depth, by just using simple shapes. And last but not least, we have Ethan Grisham. He made this poster that is for a musical artist. He wanted to have like more of a 70s vibe with his typeface. Again, utilizing the horizontal typeface with the lyrics, but then kind of, curving it around his subject. So again, this is all done with the pen tool. That's how it has so much detail and depth to it. So I apologize, I don't actually know how to say this artist name, but it's a beautiful poster with a really fantastic color scheme. So something also to think about when you're doing these posters: what are the color schemes? Are they analogous? Are they split complementary, so on and so forth? I'm going to link an Adobe color sort of site to it so you can see how you can work with those colors. Or you could just keep it simple and do your, kind of standard constructivist red, black, white, or parchment, so on and so forth. So those are some student examples. I'm going to link that also as well. If you want to go back and take a look at that, that will be an overview. It'll be the last thing in overview. And thanks for hanging in there. I can't wait to see your posters. I will talk to you all soon.